From Science Centre Singapore, this is Void Deck, a podcast spotlighting the science in Singaporean life. I'm your host, Janice. The athletic achievements of Joseph Schooling and Shanti Pereira have captivated and inspired Singaporeans. Today, we are asking, what technologies are used to train Singapore's top athletes? And to find out more, we chatted with Sport Biomechanics Dr. Marcus Lee, who previously served as Head of Sports Science and Medicine at Sport Singapore. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, let's dive straight into our very first question of the day. So how would you explain biomechanics to people who have no science background?
So the word bio and mechanics.
Yes.
Bio refers to biological systems.
Yes.
Right? Things that are alive. Mechanics refers to forces, whether it's producing forces or absorbing forces, and mainly anchored on the science of physics. So it's really utilizing the laws of physics to understand the movements of biological systems. My space is sport biomechanics, so naturally it's adapting this in a sporting context. But that's what you find on Google. In the actual practice, when we work with athletes, during my time, I guess I came up with a model. It's called the 4S model: structure, strength, skill, strategy. So to explain what we do, essentially in sport, what our athletes are doing, they're moving their musculoskeletal structure or bodily structure with the appropriate strength to satisfy the skill requirements of the sport. So how you need to move your body is related to what the sport requires you to do. And all else being equal, by knowing your strengths and weaknesses and that of your opponents and strategizing, so that's the 4th S, you've got a better chance of winning.
Awesome. So to sum this all up, biomechanics is really about the science of how living things move.
Absolutely, and perform skillfully.
Now let's move on to our second question. So what role does a sports scientist play in an athlete's success?
I guess you can look at us as a supporter of the coach and the athlete. And this triad becomes really, really important. So the athlete is the most important person in this whole triad. And we're always athlete-centered because at the end of the day, they are the ones in the arena competing. They are the ones who go through the ups and downs of winning and losing. And they're the ones who, when they have breakthrough performances, actually have the power to inspire Singaporeans and dream of wanting to achieve more. The coaches are also very important because they're the ones guiding the athletes along the way. And the scientists really, I always say that athletes and coaches are scientists themselves because every day they're thinking of ways to improve. A sports scientist's role is to listen to what the coach and the athletes are talking about and then using scientific knowledge to say, hey, would this work? Would that work? And use a scientific approach to hopefully get us, increase our chance of achieving the outcomes that we want.
So what type of equipment or technologies do you use to train Team Singapore's athletes in general?
I remembered I was showing a Straits Times reporter around. He was asking me what's some of the tech that you use that we may not know of. For example, we use a core temperature monitoring pill that we have actually got to put it up the rectum. It's a bit different, but that gives you the most accurate readings of core temperature. So, for example, if we wanted to monitor the core temperature of our sailors out in the heat, right? And obviously temperature is really, really important. That's something that we use. So there's data that's transmitted from the pill out and we can monitor that live. That's one example. We put on eye trackers on our athletes. So we are able to look through the eyes of our athletes, where they're looking at, how long for, and there's some science to that.
Eye trackers, would they be in the form of glasses or like contact lenses that they can actually wear?
They are in the form of glasses, but these days they can even be in the form of headbands. Back in the day, yes, they are in the form of contact lenses, but that's a bit more invasive. That's an example. We put reflective markers on our athletes' bodies and we recreate their movements in 3D and use animation to study how they move. So yeah, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. The pill in the rectum one is pretty cool. I've not heard of that so far. All right, then let's move on to our next question. So how do you use technology to study the biomechanics of Shanti Pereira sprinting and provide a competitive edge?
Well, it starts off by engaging with the coach and the athlete to find out. One question that I like to ask always is, if you were to narrow down to 3 things that would help you make a breakthrough, what might they be? And one of the things that we identified together was that if you looked at Shanti's races back in the day, she would always trail behind her competitors at the start, and then she catches up. So what we did was we focused on the start, and we took Shanti into the lab. And interestingly, I mentioned structure, strength, skill, strategy. Structurally, Shanti is very talented. Strength-wise, when we did various kinds of strength measurements, and these measurements are, I have to say, quite different from what you see in the gym. These are very, very specific strength measurements using different systems. But what we found, interestingly, was in the lab, on her third step, the braking forces were actually higher than the propulsive forces. And you would think that, how does that work? Because ideally, as you're pushing on the ground, Newton's third law, every action has a reaction. So the more force you're able to apply to the ground in the appropriate direction, it pushes you forward. But what we found was the braking forces on the third step was actually higher. So that led to a whole bunch of interventions together with the coaches to try and optimize that. At that time, we landed on a strategy to improve upon her technique, or in biomechanics, we say kinematics. Kinematics refers to the movement quality, whereas kinetics refers to the forces involved. So if I can remember correctly, because that was some time ago, and Shanti obviously now is performing at a much different level. Kudos to her for her hard work. And
Yes, kudos.
Yeah, and her coach, really, because all we did was a very small part. So when you talk about technology, we did 2 things. The first was, with the 3D motion analysis system, we created some script, or using programming, we were then able to provide real-time feedback. What real-time feedback means is, as you're moving, we identify different parts of your body that we want to track live and guide the movement to where we want it to go. If the foot position off the ground, when it's too high or it's too low and it's not giving you that appropriate distance ahead, and therefore Shanti was not able to apply the optimal forces, when we've identified what that foot height is, we can then program it to say, okay, when you're moving in space, if the foot height is not that, we want that auditory feedback. Second thing we did was we collaborated with a company to optimize these magnetic gates, so that when Shanti goes through these gates, basically it gives you a distance and time matrix, so that you can start plotting velocity distance curves, so we know how fast she's moving across different distances. And using machine learning, you could count how many steps she took, what was the trajectory of her feet, how long she was in the air for, etc., etc. So that played quite a big role prior to the Asian Games in her preparation. And again, kudos to her and her coach. They did extremely well at Asian Games and created history.
Awesome. Well, it really sounds like there's quite a lot of modern high-tech training equipment available out there. But that leads me to my next question. So you previously shared that training equipment, they don't always need to be fancy, right? So could you share about the story of how a simple camera helped Joseph Schooling achieve his Olympic gold medal?
Well, first, I want to say again, it's kudos to him and the coaches.
Kudos.
No technology or science can claim to create those results. What did happen at the Olympics was that a colleague of mine from the biomechanics team was on the ground. Often in swimming or race-based sports, we do something called performance analysis. And it's pretty simple. So when you're at the pool, lane ropes, they've got different colors. The different colors represent different distances. So by filming you swimming, I'm able to have a time element and to know how much time you've spent to cover a certain amount of distance. Distance over time is velocity or speed, and we plot that curve across distance. So you've got a velocity distance curve. So on the ground, by that time, Joseph Schooling was already third at the World Championships. He was doing really, really well. And because these curves are plotted not just during a major competition, but at various competitions and during trainings, the team knew what Joseph Schooling's best timing would look like in his first 15 meters, in his next 25, 50, so on and so forth. And you can imagine we can actually plot a curve to say if Joseph was able to do all these timings, what would the eventual timing look like? So at the Olympics, Michael Phelps was still swimming, but Michael Phelps was also quite a bit older. So when his curves were plotted and Joe's curves were plotted, it was quite clear that because Michael Phelps was still taking part in many events, the velocity distance curves were suggesting that he was gradually slowing down more and more across the days. So that signaled to the team that maybe at his age, he is fatiguing a lot quicker these days. The team knew that if Joseph was able to do his best timings on the day, and based on Michael Phelps's curves that suggested he was slowing down over the days, he could have a chance to create history. So therefore, my colleague did some calculations and made a recommendation to the coaches and Joseph to say that in your first 50 meters, if you want to turn half a body length ahead of Michael Phelps, this would be the time and this would be the number of strokes. And then the second 50, this would be the time and this would be the number of strokes. That's just a bit mathematical. At the end of the day, Joseph had to do it himself.
Yeah.
Why half a body length is because generally in swimming, if you're turning side by side with a veteran, it will be a dogfight. And somebody who's won so many gold medals at Olympics is going to be challenging. But for somebody who's fatiguing, so there's a bit of psychology here, if you're able to turn half a body length ahead, it could be quite demoralizing for somebody who's a bit older. On that day itself, Joe basically outdid whatever recommendations that we made. So he turned, and true enough, he was, I think, 3/4 body length ahead. So that's a little role that the team played in his race during the Olympic finals.
What a story. Wow. Okay, and moving on to our very last question of the day. How can Singaporeans use technology easily available to them, for example, their phones or their fitness trackers, to improve their fitness?
I get asked this question quite a bit. The very fact that we all have a mobile phone, it really is revolutionary in a sense. Before mobile phones had cameras, video cameras, all these were standalone pieces of equipment. So to even film oneself and do simple measurements, it was a big task. But now with a phone, with high-speed cameras that you can capture yourself moving in slow motion, really is up to one's own creativity on what you want to do. If you're looking at improving the quality of your movements, just filming yourself and reviewing it, doing a quick ChatGPT search on what needs to be done, you could do that. There are some apps that allows you to draw on the images. You can put two images side by side. You can compare pre and a post. You can draw different angles. There are even apps that suggest what optimal movement looks like. But I'm always a little bit skeptical about that because we all move in different ways. You and I, we can run 100 meters and get to the finishing line at exactly the same speed, but move in very different ways. So while apps and technology is useful to look at all these things, you do need a discerning eye to know what are the areas that if you intervene in, it will make a difference compared with not.
All right, and that's all the time we have here for today. Thank you, Dr. Marcus Lee, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
We hope you've learned something new about biomechanics and sports science today. Now you can find the episode transcript, full show notes, and past episodes at voiddeck.science.edu.sg/podcast. And if you've enjoyed the episode, please rate and subscribe to the podcast. See you soon and stay curious.